and welcome to this bonus episode of Wow, That's Problematic. I'm your host, Nicole, and today we are not going to be delving into a movie. Instead, I will be discussing the concept of heteronormativity, as well as its more malicious and sometimes violent cousin, heterosexism. I will also be discussing bisexuality. Although I've tailored my discussion to you straight or straight-leaning folks out there, this discussion is one I hope all our listeners may benefit from. First, I'd like to define heterosexuality. According to GLAAD, it is an adjective used to describe a person whose enduring physical, romantic, and/or emotional attraction is to people of a sex different than their own, also known as straight. Before we dive into the meaning of heteronormativity and heterosexism, I'm going to ask you a few questions from Dr. Martin Rochlin's heterosexual questionnaire. I'd like you to notice how the questions make you feel. 1. When and how did you decide that you were a heterosexual? 2. Is it possible that your heterosexuality is just a phase that you may grow out of? 3. If you've never slept with a person of the same sex, is it possible that all you need is a good same-sex lover? 4. Why do you insist on flaunting your heterosexuality? Can't you just be who you are and keep quiet? And 5, considering the menace of overpopulation, how could the human race survive if everyone were heterosexual like you? These are only a few of the questions from Dr. Rochlin's questionnaire, which I will link in the show notes. How did you feel about these questions? Were you amused, uncomfortable, annoyed, even angry? I believe these absurd questions illustrate the superiority and supremacy displayed by heterosexism. Oh, hey, there's that word again. So what does it mean? Heterosexism is the assumption that being heterosexual is inherently better than being lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, and more. Make no mistake, heterosexism is a form of oppression, similar to racism, classism, ableism, and sexism. All of these discriminatory practices put power into the hands of those who belong to the dominant group while denying power to those in the subordinate group. I used the words dominant and subordinate, and I'd like to bring in another concept that helped me to understand this hierarchy that exists within US culture and many other cultures. This concept is called the mythical norm and was coined by the wonderful Black lesbian poet Audre Lorde in her essay in April 1980 called Age, Class, Race, and Sex. I will link this in the show notes. This is what she said, quote, "Somewhere on the edge of consciousness, there is what I call a mythical norm, which each one of us within our hearts knows that is not me. In America, this norm is usually defined as white, thin, male, young, heterosexual, Christian, and financially secure." End quote. I'd humbly like to add to this list, able-bodied and cisgender. Cisgender is, of course, a term describing those whose gender matches the sex they were assigned at birth. This concept of the mythical norm has really helped me to see how deeply erroneous these rigid standards are when looking at what we view as acceptable and normal in both ourselves and in other people. Learning about and more deeply understanding these terms and concepts has helped me to examine my own often unconscious belief systems, as well as my complicity within the hierarchical system. This hierarchical system or system of oppression values specific identities and devalues those that don't fit into the narrow, impossible standard it sets forth. As a small but pertinent side note, this type of hierarchy within the larger system also tends to exist in smaller systems, even within the LGBTQ plus community and within the feminist movement. This is another reason it is so important to examine our own buy-in to the system. I promised that I'd also discuss the concept of heteronormativity. According to journalist Alexandra Baran, heteronormativity is an ideology that places rigid and unrealistic limits on both sexuality and gender. Heteronormativity means that both heterosexuality as well as the limited cisgender male-female binary is natural and superior. In other words, being straight and cisgender are seen as the norm. This ideology, and that's exactly what it is, an ideology, is pervasive because it spreads into all areas of life and through most systems. It's destructive because those who don't fit into the rigid identity categories experience discrimination, erasure, punishment, and even death. I'd like to introduce you to another Black poet and author named June Jordan, who explained that there exists a politics of sexuality that include, quote, all of the different ways in which some of us seek to dictate to others what we should do, what we should desire, what we should dream about, and how we should behave ourselves generally, end quote. Jordan goes on to suggest that those of us who do not fit into a heteronormative system can help to dismantle this system by speaking up rather than staying quiet. For some, however, coming out as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, intersex, pansexual, two-spirit, or asexual, LGBTQ+ for short, may be dangerous and even life-threatening. My social position affords me a level of safety and security, and as a feminist advocate who is committed to a feminist movement to end sexist oppression, as Bell Hooks describes feminism, I am responsible to share my personal story with the intention of fighting against the dominant culture and political system that values and upholds heterosexism and heteronormativity. So here I go. Through my personal exploration of my own internalized heteronormativity and heterosexism, which includes complicity and therefore collusion with the dominant white heteropatriarchal system in which I live, I have come to a deeper understanding of my own sexuality. Up until recently, I have labeled myself heterosexual, despite having also been attracted to people of all genders. I'm not straight. I'm a bisexual woman, a personal truth I didn't let myself in on because of two reasons. One, I'd only been in long-term romantic relationships with cis men, and two, I'm married to a cis man. Wow, that is some tricky and, dare I say, problematic thinking. This rationale is limiting my awareness of who I am because of those two circumstances. What about the much longer list of circumstances that lean me toward bisexuality and also lean me toward the freeing elements of this awareness of self? More importantly, does the rigidity in which I distinguish the label of heterosexuality or bisexuality factor in? Of course it does. My understanding, accepting, and naming of this identity offers me feelings that I can only describe as wholeness and freedom within myself. I share this personal story about how heterosexism and heteronormativity has affected me in the hopes that you may see parallels in your own life. Maybe you are straight as an arrow, or perhaps you see elements of my story that parallel your own. Regardless, I'd like to encourage you to look at how heteronormativity and even heterosexism may influence your life in ways you may not be aware of. I encourage you to take time over the next few weeks to simply notice how these two concepts, realities, play out in small or large ways in your life, as well as in the systems you are a part of. I also encourage you to frequently practice deep and genuine self-love as a powerful step towards dismantling the limiting and potentially damaging belief systems, as well as a step towards dismantling dominant systems of oppression. Here's the thing, once you begin to see, you can't unsee. Let's continue the conversation. I would love to hear your experience with heteronormativity and heterosexism, and I would also love to answer any questions you have to the best of my ability. Send me a direct message through Instagram at wow, that's problematic. And thank you.